Yo, what up? The tank role is kind of a dumpster fire right now with suffering. It's not that much fun to play. So to kind of help people out a bit, maybe alleviate their suffering slightly, I wanted to share some tank tips on 1, how to maybe get more kills and more value out of your kit, and secondly, how to not die. Now, the first tip for helping you secure kills is actually a pretty unique one that I don't see a lot of people take advantage of, which is using your barriers offensively and not just defensively. So of course, not every tank can do this because they don't have any barriers, but the 2 big ones that can use this a lot that I don't see people do often enough are Sigma and Ramattra. So for both these heroes, if you see a window of opportunity where the enemy team's tank starts to get low and you want to go in for the kill on them, you can make a bit of a risky play because it uses your barrier, which is usually an ability reserved for defense, for offense instead. But what you want to do is just kind of place it behind the enemy team's tank, in between them and their supports. A majority of the forms of healing that are present in Overwatch do not go through enemy barriers. So if you just quickly throw up your barrier behind the enemy team's tank, you can usually completely block them off from any form of long-range healing, such as, Kiriko, Baptiste, Ana, and possibly force out some strong defensive cooldowns such as Lamp or Suzu in order for those heroes to try and save the tank. Because oftentimes people don't pay attention to this. It's probably something they need to pay attention to more when playing against, Sigma or Ramattra. Even Winston's another tank that can do it. He can dive supports, drop the bubble in front of them, and then the rest of his team can focus down the tank while their supports are bubbled off. But I mean, that's kind of just part of Winston's already existing playstyle, which I'll talk about. But especially Sigma and Ramattra are 2 characters that can get a lot of mileage out of using their barriers sometimes to block healing instead of damage whenever they're looking for an opportunity to make a play and try and diff the enemy tank. Now for our next tip, that's more of a general tank tip that also only applies to certain characters, and that is to respect your armor. Your armor, which is the yellow part of your health bar, reduces any damage that it takes by 30%, which is pretty important to know when you're trying to, not die. So a really good tip for people that might struggle with dying and trying to, play safe is to treat your armor like it's a timer for how long you can play aggressively. When you have armor, you can go play aggressively. Using Ryan as an example, if you have your armor up, you can play aggressive, you can throw fire strikes, you can swing on people, etc. But as soon as that armor's gone, you're effectively going to be taking 43% more damage than you were before, which is a lot. So whenever you do run out of armor, you're always going to be wanting to try and fall back then so you can be healed back up to full by your supports, and then go back in. A lot of the time it might feel like you're doing fine and you have a lot of health, but you don't really because you lost a lot of armor. And it will often feel like you explode because once you're out of armor, you're going to be taking 43% more damage than you were before. So yeah, just respect your armor, use it as a timer for engaging the enemy, and when you need to start falling back and playing defensively. Now for the important thing, I'm going to talk a bit about strategies for taking space and not dying for every single tank in the entire game. So starting off with probably a lot of people's favorite tank to play, we have Reinhardt. Reinhardt is honestly one of the better tanks to play in the game right now just because of how much healing is in the game, and Reinhardt has a lot of armor, so he can tank a lot more damage than you would expect, then hide behind his 1400 health barrier to get healed back up by his team, and then continue to play aggressively. And like when I talked about armor, that is a big part of Reinhardt's playstyle, is go aggressive, swing your hammer, throw fire strikes when you have your armor up, but as soon as that armor starts to go away, you're going to want to put up your barrier, wait for your supports to heal you back up, and then you can keep swinging. To that end, it's also important to kind of have an escape option available to you if you ever do just get really hard pressured by the enemy team. Because sometimes if your team's DPS aren't taking duels with the enemy DPS and are playing very passively, it can be very hard to do stuff as the tank because you'll just have the entire enemy team looking at you because the enemy team's DPS don't have anything better to do, so they're just going to look at you and just mow you down. Tanking in general gets much easier if your DPS are playing confidently and taking those duels against the enemy team's DPS, because that just means you have less people looking at you 24/7, and it's much easier for you to go in and take space for your DPS to work with. So it's kind of a mutual relationship where your DPS have to help you take space by engaging with the enemy team's DPS so they don't just mow you down for free, and then you help out your team's DPS by then going in and taking space while there's not as much pressure on you. But yeah, you can't always rely on that, so it's always good to have some kind of escape option on Reinhardt, because there's so much damage in the game that sometimes even a 1400 health barrier isn't going to last more than a few seconds if you're being hard focused down by a team of 5 people. So always keep in mind any piece of cover that you could try and get behind with your barrier, such as, you know, the payload, any walls, anything like that, so that if you do get pressured out and you need to fall back to get healed up, you can't just rely on your barrier to take all the damage for you while you get healed up. You do have that escape option. To this end, it's also important that if you don't see any easily accessible cover that you could, you know, play around if you were to get pressured out, you want to make sure that you go into that fight with all of your resources intact. Don't go in with a half health barrier. Don't go in when you're missing some armor. Wait until you have everything, then go in. Moving on to probably one of the other best tanks in the meta right now, we have Sigma. Moving on to Sigma, who is one of the other best tanks right now in the meta. Sigma is one of the least durable tanks in the game. He really does want to play range, play his distance, and use abilities very well in order to keep himself alive and present in the fight, because he only has 550 health and has no armor, unlike some of the other tanks in the game. However, he does have a barrier, albeit a very strange one with how it functions, and he has kinetic grasp, which allows him to absorb any damage from the front and also convert it into overhealth. So how you want to be playing Sigma and taking space is you really want to be playing corners and other pieces of hard cover. You really want to be playing around your barrier as little as possible, since you can use it to, you know, block off heals for the enemy team, because he can deploy it anywhere if he just holds right click long enough. And it also isn't nearly as strong as Reinhardt's barrier. It only has 700 health, and if you want to move it at all, then you have to wait a full 2 seconds after you take it down to put it back up again. So what you really want to be doing is playing corners, playing close walls and cover, and then using your barrier to get you to that cover. So if you want to go in and take space, you'll want to throw up barrier, walk in with it, get to cover, take it down, play around that cover while you wait for your barrier to restore all of its health while it's down, and then kind of hold that position for as long as you can. And then if you want to move up more and take more space, then you throw out your barrier, move with it, get to new cover, play around that cover, repeat. You usually never want to use Grasp, because Grasp is the best ability that Sigma has. It lasts for 2 seconds and is basically infinite damage blocked. It will block all damage thrown at it, so it's what you're going to want to save for if you're ever under pressure and need to fall back. You just take down your barrier, kinetic grasp, walk out. If you need to cover yourself, you can put your barrier back up at the very end and then try to completely get out off of that. It's easily his strongest cooldown, but it's one you're going to want to use to get out because of how it's capable of blocking an infinite amount of damage. So as a TLDR for Sigma, you're going to want to place up barrier, move in with it, play corners whenever you're trying to hold space, save your grasp for trying to get out. And again, like I talked about at the beginning with using your barriers offensively, if you're playing close walls at Sigma, then yeah, that opens up a lot of possibilities to use your barrier to block key cooldowns such as anti-nades, sleep darts, even, you know, ultimate abilities if there's something that can be blocked, which is kind of why you want to always have it down and play corners so that you can quickly throw it up if you need to block, you know, a nade, a sleep dart, anything like that. And you can also use it aggressively to block off heals as well if you are playing close corners in order to stay alive. Next up, I'll talk about Doomfist. Doomfist is a character that always performs well. He's just incredibly hard to play, very technical hero that requires a lot you have to know about him in order to do stuff effectively. It's not very forgiving if you play him without having a really good grasp on his movement and how he wants to play. But generally with Doomfist, you're going to want to go in and you're going to want to try and secure a kill on your own by punching someone into a wall and then finishing them off with your primary. Most of your damage, basically all of your damage, comes from your primary fire, and you'll want to be good at knocking someone into a wall, and then following that up with critical hits from your primary in order to secure a kill, and then trying to get out off of that. Now when engaging with Doomfist, you're going to want to first get close nearby to the enemy team with your abilities, and then wait for them to be off cooldown. And you're going to have two main ways of engaging. One, if you have cover and you have a clear shot onto someone that you can see on the enemy team that you can punt, you can engage with rocket punts first and punt in on someone. This isn't as useful if the enemy team has any sort of, stun or interruption ability, such as Cassidy's Hinder or Orisa's Javelin or Sigma Rock. Basically anything that can stun you, knock you down, sleep dart. It's not going to be as good to engage with punts, because even if you do come out at the last second from behind cover, the enemy team is going to hear you charging it and know that you're coming and might be able to deal with it, unless you're coming from like a very weird angle sliding off of a wall or something. After landing that punch, you're going to want to slam backwards towards a piece of cover, then power block, then use power block to try and get completely behind the cover where you can wait for your cooldowns to get back online. If the enemy team gives you empowered punch when you're doing this, you're probably better off waiting and then using it on the next engagement, and then possibly going in with the other cooldown cycle, which is starting with slam, then doing punts, then immediately throw up your block. And out of block, you have two things that you can do. If you get empowered punts and the enemy team is very tightly grouped and there's a wall you can punch them into and try and get another kill, then you can just go for immediately letting that empowered punch go, trying to get another kill, and then hoping that that's enough for your team to just win the fight, and that the enemy team won't have enough people left to punish you for using all of your cooldowns like that, or you're just going to want to stand there with block up until you're able to get out. Because even if the enemy team does not damage you, so you get your empowered punch and you immediately get punch off cooldown, power block is still really good because it just buys you time to get your other abilities off cooldown. If you engage with slam, then punch, then block, odds are you're not going to be near any cover and you're going to have to use your next punch in order to get out and get back to your team. Unless, of course, you get an empowered punch and you see a really good punch that you can get a kill off of, then you can maybe risk it for the biscuit, but who knows. Recognizing those situations is something that'll come with experience. Just remember that when using slam, you generally want to be hitting as many people as possible with it, because Doomfist gets overhealth for every enemy that he hits with his abilities, and slam, having a very wide hitting range in front of him, is really good for this. Hitting an entire team with your slam will basically give you an extra 200 health to work with. So Doomfist really relies off of hitting these abilities and getting value out of them in order to stay alive and tank for his team, because if you're not hitting these abilities, you're going to have much less health to work with. Next, to quickly knock off a few characters that play very similarly, we're going to talk about the rest of the dive heroes, aka Wrecking Ball, Winton, and D.va. So Wrecking Ball, I was just watching the video of someone who one-tricks Wrecking Ball if there's someone who has a guide. I don't play him nearly as much, and Wrecking Ball is very technical hero, very similar to Doomfist. I have played a lot of Doomfist, but I have not played a lot of Wrecking Ball, so I cannot really give super good advice on him. Other than the standard, you're going to want to flank and tank angles, swing in, pile drive, try and kill people off a pile drive, get out, press the E button to get more health when you pile drive, etc. I will say one thing is to never try and manually reload as Ball, because Ball's animation for reloading takes 1.6 seconds. However, if you are in Ball form and not in, I'm just going to call it crab form, and not in crab form, Wrecking Ball will actually reload automatically after 2 seconds in ball form. And being in ball form is just much safer than being in crab form as Wrecking Ball, because ball form just moves around faster, meaning you can AD strafe, go in a little circle, and be hard to hit. But more importantly, when in ball form, Wrecking Ball does not have a critical hit hitbox. This means that you take much less damage when you are in ball form than when you are in normal form. So you can take advantage of this to reload, since he reloads automatically after a couple seconds in ball form. You can also just, give up on a kill and stay in ball form so that you're virtually unpunishable, because, it can be very hard to burst down a tank that has 1,000 health because they pressed the E button and gained 500 additional health if they don't even have a critical hit hitbox. So there are a lot of situations that you can really abuse the fact that ball form does not have a head hitbox and you can't really be killed very easily during it. So there's the one actual Wrecking Ball tip I think I could give people. Next up we have D.va being a dive tank, you're going to want to get in close, pick out a target, and then dive onto them. Generally, D.va, you'll just want to move from cover to cover using defense matrix to cover yourself while you move from one place to another, and then just wait for it to come back before you go in. Now, when you finally do find someone to engage off of and you're close enough, you basically just want to hit everything. You want to fly in, you want to use your micro missiles, and you just want to nuke that person into oblivion. Then just try and, you know, play cover, hold that space until you can use your boosters again and either get out, or if you're being, you know, pocketed by support and kept alive and you have a lot of health, you can just use your boosters to go on to another target. It will be harder to kill without your micro missiles though, so you might just want to play safe and just hold that position until you have those micro missiles back. But also don't forget that, especially if you have, you know, other dive DPS that are working with you, you can also always just use defense matrix on whatever target you're diving instead of using your primary fire, just because micro missiles will deal a lot of damage, and putting someone into defense matrix will basically guarantee that they can't be healed by anything, because defense matrix will eat any form of healing aside from, I believe, Brig Repair Pack, Mercy Beam, and, you know, the AoE healing like Lucio, Aura, or Inspire. But other than that, if they're running like Ana, Lifeweaver, Kiriko, defense matrix will eat all of that healing. It'll eat Suzu, it'll eat Nade, it'll eat Sleep Dart. So oftentimes if you have someone working with you to confirm these kills, it will be better to just use defense matrix on the target instead of using your primary fire. And then for the last dive tank, we have Winston. Winston, very similar to D.va, you're going to want to get in close enough by going from cover to cover, and more importantly, not using your abilities unless you have to. Winston, you just kind of want to awkwardly walk from cover to cover. You can use leap if you really need to, but just walking from cover to cover and abusing your armor is really good, because especially if you have an Ana, basically exclusively if you have an Ana, you're going to just want to walk from cover to cover, because that means once you get to safety, you can just stand there, get healed back up by Ana, and that's going to build nano for your team, and that's going to give you a really fast nano Winston, and then nano Winston can just dump the back line and kill everyone, and that's just like a free fight win in a lot of cases, unless the enemy team uses, you know, ultimates of their own to try and counter the nano Winston. So yeah, as Winston, you just kind of want to move from cover to cover until you're close enough to actually dive on someone. Then you're going to want to dive, place bubble, play around your bubble, do general Winston shenanigans where you just play bubble, bubble dance. You can dive supports, drop bubble in front of the supports, and then they can't heal their tank, etc. Sometimes it can be good to just soft dive the supports if they have something like a Kiriko Ana. Don't even pressure them, just put the bubble there and then like turn around, just like look at them, play inside of the bubble, but you're not really playing to kill them, you're just playing to block them off from healing their tank, and kind of keep their attention on you so that they don't realize that they're forgetting to heal their tank, so that the rest of your team can focus down their tank. This is kind of why Winston's good against Zarya. In a lot of cases, Zarya's not a super sustainable tank on her own. She has no armor, she just has 2 bubbles. So if you do bubble off as Zarya's heals, then your team can usually just pressure her out and kill her. You can also turn around and jump onto her if your bubble's still up to try and finish her off, since you can also body block some forms of healing, like Ana's healing can be body blocked. So yeah, just kind of walk in close, get healed up by supports, moving from cover to cover, and then make a dive when you see the opportunity to. Next for Roadhog. Biggest tip for Roadhog, do not pick him. He does not have the insta-kill. Usually the best thing you can do if you are playing Roadhog for some godforsaken reason is to just play up front with your team. You have 700 health and a self-heal that heals you for 350 and also gives you 50% damage resistance and increases the healing that you receive afterwards. So you can just take damage for free and then just heal it back up and then get boosted healing from your supports after that. So usually it's just you just play with your team, play frontline, get a hook on someone, and then just hope that your team will focus them down with you and you can get a kill through hook. And then hopefully that pick will offset, you know, the downsides of playing Roadhog in the first place, and you can maybe win a game off of it. Next, for the 2 kind of poke tanks, we have Orisa and Ramattra. Similarly to Sigma, both of them really want to play around walls and other cover, except unlike Sigma, these two characters have ways that they can really go in and get aggressive. Orisa having Fortify, which also decreases how fast her gun overheats, so you can go and fire more with it, and Ramattra with Nemesis form, letting him go in and beat people to death with his own two hands. So especially with Orisa, your main rotation for taking space is going to be to use Javelin Spin to quickly get in, then maybe get to a corner or somewhere where you can play safe for a bit, and then start to move in. Generally, it's the best to hold Fortify to pop it whenever you're almost out of armor, because armor gives you 30% damage resistance naturally. Fortify gives you 50% damage resistance, but it only stacks up to 50%. So if you use Fortify with armor active, you're only gaining an additional 20% damage resistance, as well as also the immunity to critical hits, which is a pretty big thing. But you're not really min-maxing Fortify value if you are using it while you have armor. So generally you want to just take some damage with your armor, then pop Fortify. Now your team is going to be able to heal you back up to full while you have Fortify up, because it's just such a strong ability. And then also waiting to use Fortify means that you have a better rotation for your Javelin Spin, because now when Fortify runs out, you're almost sure to have Javelin Spin back on cooldown, and then you can use that to either get to a cover further up and try and hold that piece of cover, or try and use Javelin Spin to get back to your team if you're under too much pressure, or if there's, not really any good cover for you to take advantage of up ahead. Then you kind of just wait for Fortify, wait for Javelin Spin, and then you can, repeat the process. And also, Javelin Throw is just a good ability. You use it to try and secure kills on squishy targets, or to knock back people who are pressuring you. Now for Ramattra is a very similar character where you want to just play range, try and take space using your barrier to get from cover to cover, kind of like with Sigma. Except now whenever you see an opportunity to, you can pop into Nemesis form and run in on people. And the same thing with Reinhardt, you really want to respect your armor. When you're running out of armor, that's the moment when you're going to be wanting to focus more on blocking until you get healed up by your team, or you're able to get to cover and get healed up. And then you can continue to go play aggressively with Nemesis form for the remainder of the ability. It is also fair to note that you can use your barrier offensively to block off heals, but doing so will use both your barrier cooldown, and then you'll also probably have to use Nemesis form at the same time to go in. So it'd just be throw up barrier in front of their supports, run in with Nemesis form, try to beat the other tank to death in the 3 seconds that your barrier lasts. Or you can punch, any overextending DPS to death, because you do get the speed boost in Nemesis form, which will let you chase down heroes that are, faster than you, or cover distance to get to someone who's a bit further away. But you do have to be careful, because when you exit Nemesis form, you are not going to have your barrier back on cooldown yet if you use it like that. So you will need to be careful about where you end up once the ability runs out. General rule of thumb, just play cover, move from cover to cover, same as every other tank. You do have 2 bubbles to work with though, so if you do have both bubbles off cooldown, you can kind of just go out into the open and try and beam people down and play very aggressively. A good rule of thumb is to use 1 bubble for offense and then use the other one for defense. So you can walk in on someone first without bubble, just to take some damage. Then once you take a little bit of damage, just to, maximize the amount of value you get out of bubble, then you're going to want to use your first bubble, and you can kind of continue to play very aggressively with it. And then once that bubble runs out, if you are close to getting a kill, or maybe have already gotten a kill and want to keep playing aggressive and try to just win the fight right there, you can use your second bubble aggressively as well. Otherwise, you can kind of hold that space that you just created, and then be ready for if the other team tries to, play aggressive and try and get onto you, you have that second bubble that you can use defensively to try and get out and get back to your team, get back to, a safer piece of cover, etc. It's also fair to note that ally bubble is absolutely insane. It is kind of just better than Kiriko Suzu. If you put it on an ally, usually people just aren't going to want to suit it. Even if they do, it'll still protect them for like 1.5 seconds or so. But if no one suits it, that is 2.5 seconds of that ally not going to be taking any damage at all. It is straight up just like better Kiriko Suzu. It also cleanses status effects as well. I mean, aside from Sleep Dart. But Anti-Nade does get cleansed by it. Fire does. I'm sure. Would Virus be cleansed by it? That might be something I'd have to test. But yeah, don't underestimate ally bubble. Sorry that you need your own bubbles for playing, offensively yourself. But there is nothing wrong with playing a very defensive Zarya, holding space, moving from cover to cover, and then having, a DPS that you're working with that you're just constantly bubbling so that they can go in for free and just get a free kill every fight. Assuming that, you have a good DPS who is able to do that if you bubble them. Then finally for the last tank, probably my favorite tank to play in the game right now, and also one of the best performing tanks at a lot of ranks, Junker Queen. Junker Queen is the go in fast, kill everything, or go in fast and die tank. You basically want to get in close, use commanding Sout, and then that's basically all you have. Junker Queen is the solo tank. You need to be hitting your knives and hitting your carnages, getting value, and doing everything you can to win a fight with the 5 seconds after you use commanding Sout that you have that overhealth and you have that speed boost. Honestly, one of the best supports to play with a Junker Queen is just a Lucio. Lucio, Sout, amped speed boost, you just run in as hard as possible and just try and get on people with your axe and just secure a kill or two. And if you're able to get a kill or two, especially on the other team's DPS, it's going to be much more difficult for them to kill you now that their big damage sources are gone. I would almost say it's much better to run on the enemy DPS than it is to run on the enemy team's supports. Because the DPS are the real threat to you because they're the big damage dealers on the enemy team who can burst you down. If they're out of the picture, then even without commanding Sout, you'd probably be able to play cover and live. Or even just play very aggressively and live with the Lucio speed boost still. But yeah, not super good advice I can give other than just run in, be good at hitting your abilities. If the enemy team has people playing on high ground, use a knife and try to pull them down, axe them, then primary fire melee. That's usually your best combo is knife throw, pull knife back, melee axe, primary fire axe, primary fire melee. That's usually your highest DPS combo to just burst someone down as quickly as possible. Then after that, you kind of just try to play around cover until you have your knife back. Also as a tip, if you throw out your knife and it hits a wall or hits a target, you do not have to pull it back up immediately. Especially if it hits the enemy tank, or it hits someone that's too far away for you to really, capitalize off of pulling them. You can just leave the knife in them, or leave the knife in the surface that it's stuck in and wait for someone to walk in front of it so that you can pull it through them. Because the cooldown will be exactly the same whether you leave the knife in someone or pull it out early. So you can just leave the knife in the surface and wait for people to walk in front of it so you can pull it through them, or leave it in a target if they're too far away for you to immediately get value. Like if you pull them, they're not going to fall off high ground. You can kind of wait and see if maybe they get a little bit closer and then try pulling them, because it's not going to impact the cooldown or the damage. All the damage is dealt when the knife first hits. Leaving it in doesn't deal any more or less. In the same way that pulling it in early does not make the cooldown go down any faster. So yeah, sorry it's a bit long. I didn't think it would be this long talking about all of the tanks, but hopefully some of these tips can help people out, since I know tank is kind of a miserable role right now to play. So hopefully you can apply some of these to your own play style and maybe have a little bit more fun. So yeah, until next time, see ya.